Caíque couldn't quite explain why he woke up earlier that day. The clock still read 5:20 when he sat on the edge of the makeshift bed, made of two thin mattresses on the cold floor of the room he shared with his sister. The zinc roof let drops of moisture fall, and the smell of mold was stronger than usual. He didn't turn on the light. He just stared at his feet, trying to understand that tightness in his chest that had been there for days, but felt stronger today. It was Monday, and he needed to leave soon to try and find any kind of gig before 7. The girl, Anna, lying next to him, coughed softly. He gently pulled her blanket up to her neck and pressed his forehead to hers, feeling a fever coming on. He closed his eyes for a second and thought, "Today I have to do something. I can't wait any longer." Anna had been sick for about 3 days, but Caíque had been putting off the trip to the hospital. Their mother had disappeared again. It had been 2 weeks since anyone had seen her, and he was trying to manage everything alone. At 16, he already knew the health center, the procedures, the suspicious looks from staff, and the doors that closed when they saw he had no guardian with him. At school, he'd missed too much. The teachers had started to say he wasn't the same anymore, but how could he be? He woke up, collected recyclables, made deliveries, picked up leftover medicine from neighbors, came back home, and still took care of his sister. That day, though, she'd gotten worse. Her breathing was shallow, her chest wheezing. He looked around and realized there was no way to improvise anymore. He grabbed his backpack, packed her documents, a small water bottle, and left in a hurry. He knew if he didn't rush, it might be too late. The path to the health center was a dirt road, with puddles of dirty water reflecting the cloudy sky of that early morning. Caíque pushed the bicycle with one hand and held Anna with the other. She was limp, her head resting on his chest, and each time she coughed, her whole body shook. He tried to carry her, but she complained of pain. So he kept going as best he could, stumbling on the gravel, feeling his heart tighten with every step. When he reached the reception, the security guard didn't even let him finish speaking. He said an adult was required and that the system was down. Caíque insisted. He begged. He pleaded. The receptionist looked at him with impatience and said that without his mother's documents or authorization, Anna couldn't be seen. That was when he noticed how much he was trembling, not from cold, but from fear. Outside, he sat on the curb with Anna on his lap, trying to figure out what to do. He had been there before. He knew arguing wouldn't help, but seeing his sister like that and not being able to help hurt more than any beating he had ever taken. He reached into his pocket, found a few coins, not even enough for a bus fare. He thought about walking to the central hospital, but it was too far, and she wouldn't make it. Meanwhile, she squeezed his hand with her thin fingers, gasping for air. That's when he looked across the street and saw the pharmacy. He knew which medicine she needed. He'd seen the name on the boxes at home. He stood up slowly, crossed the street, and entered. The clerk, a sleepy-looking young man in a white coat, didn't even look up. When Caíque asked for the medicine, he got the same response as always. No prescription, no medicine. Caíque tried to explain. He said his sister was sick, it was an emergency, he knew the medicine's name, and he just needed that one bottle. The clerk shook his head, annoyed, and pointed to a sign on the wall. Controlled medications, prescription only. And that was it. No compassion, no doubt, no questions. It was as if Caíque didn't exist. He stood there for a few seconds, hand on the counter, mouth slightly open, heart racing. He thought about leaving, giving up, trying the hospital again. But when he looked through the window and saw Anna curled up on the sidewalk, struggling to breathe, something inside him broke. He took 2 steps back, took a deep breath, and made a decision. He slipped into one of the aisles, found the shelf where he'd seen the medicine before, and grabbed a bottle. He tried to hide it inside his coat, but the sound of the box hitting the zipper caught attention. A customer saw him, alerted the clerk, and within 30 seconds, a security guard was already grabbing him by the arm. Caíque didn't resist. He didn't run, didn't scream, didn't try to explain. He just held out the bottle and said, barely audible, "It's for my sister. She's outside. She can't breathe." The security guard didn't listen. He yanked him hard, twisting his arm back like he was dealing with a dangerous criminal. The bottle fell to the floor and rolled to the feet of an older woman who simply watched, saying nothing. Outside, Anna curled up as if each breath cost her more than she could pay. Caíque fell to his knees beside her. his arm throbbing from where the guard had grabbed him. He wrapped his coat around the makeshift blanket, reached out a trembling hand to his sister, and tried to help her drink from the water bottle. Every drop seemed like a monumental effort for her. He whispered comforting words, but his own sobs were stuck in his throat. The street was quiet, except for hurried footsteps of people heading to work, and the hum of cars splashing through puddles. No one stopped. No one noticed. He knew it was too late to go back. When Caíque realized he couldn't bear seeing Ana like that for another minute, he decided to try again at the pharmacy. He got up, ignoring the pain in his arm and the whole body trembling with cold and desperation. He entered through the revolving door once more. The clerk looked up, already impatient. Caíque placed the backpack on the counter, showing the untouched bottle. "I paid, sir. I just took it into that aisle. You can check. The stock, I swear." The words came out rough, like a knife cutting the air. The clerk examined the bottle, hesitated. He went to the back, returned, looked at Caíque, and finally picked up the phone. In a few seconds, he explained the situation to someone on the other end. Caíque stood still, heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst out of his chest. The call didn't take long. On the other end, probably the manager authorized the sale, but the condition was clear. He had to pay. Caíque knew he didn't have the money, but before he could say anything, a woman in line stepped forward and placed a crumpled bill on the counter. She didn't say anything, just nodded at the clerk and returned to her place. Caíque's face burned with shame and relief at the same time. He grabbed the bottle with sweaty hands, ran outside, and knelt next to Ana. He tried to give her the medicine as quickly as possible, but his hands were shaking so much he almost dropped it. Ana coughed hard, choked, and squeezed her eyes shut as if her body resisted getting better. Caíque kept talking to her, encouraging her, telling her to breathe slowly. Little by little, the harsh sound of her breathing began to ease. She opened her eyes and looked at him with a mixture of exhaustion and trust, as if she knew he would never leave her alone. Caíque took a deep breath, but his heart was still racing. He knew that didn't fix everything. She still had a fever. They still had no food at home. Tomorrow was still uncertain. But for that moment, the worst was over, and for a brief second he believed he had managed to protect her. Sitting on the curb, Caíque watched Ana catch her breath while people passed by without even noticing them. The sound of cars, rushed conversations, the distant honk of a horn, everything seemed far away. He realized he was exhausted, his whole body heavy, as if he had been running for hours. The bill the woman had given was still folded in his back pocket. He didn't even know her name. He thought of thanking her, but when he looked again, she was already gone. He stayed there in silence, watching the street, until the cold began to bother him again. It was time to go home. The walk back felt longer. Ana leaned on him, taking short and silent steps. The medicine was starting to take effect, but she was still shivering. Caíque wrapped his arm around her shoulders, trying to warm her. They passed the same dirty puddle, the same cramped houses, the same rusty gates. Nothing had changed on the street, but something inside him felt different. He couldn't explain it yet, but that morning had shown how far he was willing to go for her. And even though he had felt fear, humiliation, and anger, he had also felt a strength he didn't know he had. When they got home, the room was colder than when they had left. Caíque closed the door and helped Ana lie down, covering her with the thin blanket. He sat beside her, watching every breath, as if making sure another crisis wouldn't come that day. He grabbed a mug and filled it with filtered water, placing it within her reach. His stomach growled, reminding him they hadn't eaten since the night before, but there was nothing to heat up. Still, at that moment, hunger seemed secondary. He just wanted to make sure she would sleep peacefully. As Ana closed her eyes, Caíque leaned back against the wall and let his thoughts come. He remembered the clerk's impatient face, the security guard twisting his arm, the silent, quick glance of the woman who paid for the medicine. He felt anger toward some and gratitude toward others. But above all, he felt a fear that hadn't gone away, the fear of not being able to sustain that fight much longer. He knew this was just one day among many, but he also knew that if he had given up, he might be living a much worse day. And that thought kept him awake, even with his body begging for rest. The only sound in the room was the occasional drip of water from the ceiling. Caíque watched Ana's face, trying to guess if she was really getting better. Her chest rose and fell more calmly now, but there was still a slight wheeze. He thought about how much easier it would be if he could take her to a doctor without facing so many barriers. But deep down, he no longer expected anything to be easy. Life had taught him early that, for them, everything came with struggle and often with humiliation. Still, that day, he had won an important battle. Caíque's body ached, and the mark on his arm left by the security guard was starting to bruise. He ran his hand over it and felt a pain that wasn't just physical. It was the memory of how he had been treated, like a threat, when all he wanted was to help. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, trying to push away the feeling of helplessness. He didn't want Anna to notice. He needed to show strength for her, because if she saw fear in his eyes, she would lose her courage too. And Caíque knew that. In their world, courage was one of the few things they couldn't afford to lose. Anna stirred in bed, slowly opening her eyes. She still looked tired, but her gaze was different, calmer, as if she believed the worst was over. Caíque adjusted her blanket and asked if she wanted water. She shook her head, declining, and closed her eyes again. He stayed there, watching, and felt a weight lift from his shoulders. It wasn't complete relief, but it was enough to breathe a little easier. For the first time, that day, he allowed himself a small, fleeting smile, like someone who finds a sliver of light at the end of a dark hallway. Outside, the street was beginning to fill with voices. Children laughing, loud music from a neighbor, the distant sound of a street vendor shouting his deals. Life went on, indifferent to what had happened just hours before. Caíque knew no one around would comment or ask. For most, crises like Anna's were just another chapter in the routine of those who lived there. But for him, that day had been different. It had shown how narrow the line between losing and staying on your feet could be. And he had crossed that line, just barely, but he had crossed it. Sitting on the floor, leaning against the wall, Caíque began to think about what to do next. He knew the money was running out and that the next month would bring the same struggles, maybe worse. But remembering how he had gotten the medicine for Anna, he realized he could no longer afford to wait for help that never came. He had to act before another crisis struck. Maybe find a steady job, maybe ask a neighbor for a favor. He didn't know yet, but the urgency to plan ahead burned in his mind like never before. He looked at the backpack tossed in the corner of the room, with the documents and half-full water bottle. That was all he had taken to face a day that had seemed impossible. And yet he had returned with the most important thing, Anna breathing better. That realization filled his chest with a quiet pride. It wasn't a grand victory to show the world, but for him it was proof that he could protect what mattered most, even without resources, even without support. And that certainty, however fragile, gave him the strength to face tomorrow. It was already past noon when Anna finally woke up, her face slightly more flushed. She asked Caíque if getting the medicine had been easy, and for a moment he thought of lying to keep her from worrying. But he simply said yes, without going into details. She smiled faintly, satisfied, and asked for some water. As he helped her drink, Caíque realized that her smile was the only reward that mattered. Everything he had gone through that morning, the fear, the humiliation, the cold, seemed smaller in the face of that simple moment. Later, when silence returned to the room, Caíque lay down on the mattress beside his sister and stared at the ceiling, feeling his body relax for the first time that day. He didn't know what tomorrow would be like or if he'd have the strength to face the challenges yet to come, but he knew that that day he had done the impossible with the little he had, and even with no one to see or applaud, that victory was his. It was in that afternoon that Caíque understood that sometimes simply resisting was already a form of winning.